So year-end tips, any tips that you can give us for this process that are kind of unique?
Yeah, just a couple things, I guess. I think we've talked about them. One of them, anyhow, is specifically with the general ledger. I mean, here we are at we're going to be at the end of December. Probably within the first week or two of January, you will have processed everything that you're going to process in the subsidiary modules, in accounts receivable and accounts payable. So you could run the year-end process for those modules and leave, because the process is done in each module. You could leave the general ledger module open, and you probably would, right? You're waiting on year-end adjustments, waiting on the accountants to come back with whatever their tax or audit adjustments are. And so it's not unusual that the general ledger would stay open for a number of periods beyond closing the other module. My recommendation is always to close all of the subsidiary modules at the same time. They give you the ability to leave some open and close others, but unless there's a real reason to do that, my recommendation is to close all the subsidiary modules at the same time, and that normally would happen within the first, whatever that is, 10 to, I don't know. I have customers that do it in 2 business days. I have customers that, maybe it's two weeks, but within the first couple of weeks of that next period to run that process, but then leave the general ledger open while you're waiting on those final adjustments. And that's not going to prevent you then from running any reports. So if you were to leave the general ledger open in 2021 while you're processing in January of 2022, to the end of January, you'll have the ability to run a full financial statement, balance sheet, and income statement for January of 2022 while your December 2021 general ledger is still open. So, it's flexible enough that, you can still process in that next period and continue to report in that next period, and it's not going to be a problem. The other note then regards payroll. If you use payroll, and this is obvious as well, but payroll is calendar and Sage can be fiscal. So with payroll, there's a quarter end process that gets run, and that will always be based on calendar quarters, March, June, September, and December. And if your company happens to be on a fiscal period, then those periods function based on the fiscal calendar in the general ledger module. So even though maybe you're not closing out the year end because you're on a fiscal, you'd still need to do it for the payroll module.
So Dave, since this is really a kind of a continuation of period end processing, the year end just follows the fiscal year.
Yep.
If I remember right, if you close the AR module, that moves the period to the next period, so 1 to 2. Mm-hmm. And if you're posting if you haven't closed it, transactions are going into what they call the next period for that rollover. So I think the fear is always waiting a whole extra month or a whole extra period, because your buckets might be kind of messy if you don't do that process. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually glad you asked that. Seriously, because you hadn't asked me that before, if you've been on Sage for a long time, you'll remember you'll remember what Jeremy's talking about, is that there was a limitation. And so you would want to close your detail module, before you got to what we call the second future. So basically, in my example, once you were going to start processing February 2022 transactions, you would want to make sure you had December closed, or otherwise we had a bucketing system and everything got messed up. When they rewrote Sage in the 4X framework, they eliminated all of those future period buckets. And so all of that's gone, really, and it's the good and the bad of it, right? I mean, it's nice now that there is no requirement to close the period for fear that you're going to mess up some of the reporting. But the bad is then you just don't close the periods, right? And so we have customers that aren't in the normal practice of closing the periods because they have eliminated that as a constraint. So yeah, they kind of did away with, and it's happened over time. But if you're on a current version today, we don't have any of those kind of next period buckets anymore. You can literally, as long as you're retaining the history, you can report on any prior period.
Got it. All right, good to know that that's been rectified. All right, so some FAQs that are pretty common. One is, can I print a financial statement for the next fiscal year prior to performing year-end processing?
Yeah. So we kind of touched on that on the last slide. If you do not run your year-end process for 2021 in the general ledger module, and you get out into January, February, and March, which is going to be typical while you're waiting on those final adjustments, then yeah, you can you can continue to run financial statements for those future periods while the general ledger is still open.
After year-end processing, can I delete accounts and still do a comparison statement?
Yeah, so if you're maintaining general ledger history, meaning you want to report on that history, then you can't really delete the accounts. So, as an example, if I've got 5 years of general ledger history in my system and I want to delete an account that I haven't used in 5 years, but it did have a balance 5 years ago, the system's not going to allow you to delete it because it's got history attached to it, right? The workaround on that really is, which makes sense, so we can't, because otherwise you'd then print a trial balance out that wouldn't be in balance. And so, do I have the right question? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I lost track there for a second. So, but what you can do is you can now in the newer versions mark accounts as inactive. So there's now a status in account maintenance where you can set an account to inactive. And then what that does is that prevents a user from posting to it. So if you have an old account that has history in it that you need for comparative financial reporting purposes, but you don't want to allow users to post to it, just flag it, set it as inactive, and it will then prevent a user from posting to that account.
So once the history is purged, ultimately we can, if we're keeping history for 5 years, in the 6th year we can delete that account.
That's correct. That's correct.
But until then, we're out. Got it. Can I process year-end in general ledger before I finish off the other modules?
Yeah, and we kind of talked about that as well. The answer on that is no. General ledger will be the last module that you close, and that's because any other module can post to that. So that'll be the last one that you would run year-end process on or period-end process on.
All right. I think the last one, can I open an old closed fiscal period in the general ledger for posting of adjustments?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. I'm going to show you how to do that. It's actually very simple. So if you get through your year-end process and for whatever reason you closed it and you forgot to book an entry, it's actually very simple to fix that. Take control of the screen.
Your screen is showing.
All right, so I have closed my general ledger through December of 2021. I forgot to book an adjusting entry. All I need to do is go back into general ledger options and change the current fiscal year right through the interface, change the current fiscal year to period 12 of 2021. So I'm resetting it manually. I then will be able to go into general journal entry and book my entry. And I'm going to book this as of 12/31/21. And to adjust cash, whatever it is, I'll make my journal entry. That makes no sense, but you get the idea. It'll allow me to post that into 2021.
Some people are cringing right now with that entry.
As I said, it makes no sense. Oh, you mean to adjust cash or just the fact that it went to prepaid expense or whatever? All right. So now that's been adjusted, or that's been posted. So once we post the adjusting entry to the period that I reopened, all I have to do then at that point is go back into general ledger options and change it back to period 1 of 2022. So the thing you do not do, we used to have to do this because of some of what Jeremy was referencing with these buckets and stuff. We don't have to do that anymore. You literally can just go in, change the period, book your entry, and then change it back to what it was. That entry will be posted in the correct period in your general ledger, and your financial statements will be fine. And so it's a very simple process to do.